mean that in the short run, those people are generating lower returns. And of course, then the question is, do we have an ability to socialize to the public at large that actually it is those that are looking at the broader spectrum of issues that are going to survive in the long run? Those that are chasing short-term profits may indeed chase short-term profits in a country that in the medium or the long term actually quite simply won't be sustainable. So it's a long-standing tension point, and I think what we're hoping to get is that there is a universal consensus among industry practitioners that, well, actually, it is in the collective interest of not only the industry, but for the country at large, for us to be able to incorporate these additional contextual factors into our decision-making.
That's a very, interesting take that you've provided us with there, Kaya. And I think I want to, give the mic to Buchi now from Alex Forbes, who boldly announced their transformation position. And I think you are agitating for the whole industry, Kaya, to take cognizance of the importance of transformation for the long term, very much as part of the strategy of retirement funds. It is for long-term investing, and we want to see the long-term impact, positive and sustainable impacts in the industry. So, Buchi, if Alex Forbes have taken this, big stance that they want to see transformation amongst their managers, is Alex Forbes value seeking? Why now? And why do you think you as a service provider have taken such a stance at this time?
I don't know if there's ever a right time to have a conversations like now, but I guess any time is always good. It feels so well timed, because I guess in many ways, I don't even want to say that our city or even province or country itself is going through some difficulty. I think the globe in itself is in some form of turmoil. And to a large extent, it just demonstrates how important it is, this discussion. And Ilya, when you were asking, what do we understand by transformation and all of that? Because I would imagine that at the heart of it is this desire to have a more inclusive, a more diverse, and a more equal society. I mean, that's the heart of it. And is that necessarily even a single national problem? I think it's a universal issue. This whole interesting debate that all of us are now caught on of ESG and so forth, it ultimately is perhaps an element of it is transformation. It is about how we get a more equal society. And I also think that sometimes we often feel that as South Africans, we are fighting this battle on our own because of our very painful history, but it's not. Ultimately, inequality is as old as humans are, and I guess there will always be elements of a part of society that thrives on inequality. And for us, among others, is how do we then, if we appreciate that humanity in itself requires a more equal society because diversity of thoughts, of operations, of all of us ultimately leads to sustainability and all of that. I think sometimes because of the racial dynamics that are part and parcel of any debate in South Africa, we often want to box it into that. But I guess for me, as we engage with this conversation, I also want to understand it in that broader context about what do we need to do as a society. And you asked, and at Alex Forbes, ultimately, that's how we also try and tackle some of these things. It's not just a narrow conversation. It is about broadly how do we transform and make the changes that are required to ensure that ultimately all of us thrive as a society and as a people. So I guess I would want to put it into that broader context before we come home. And you're asking about whether any aspect of our society or even industry can choose to be bystanders in this conversation, and we can't. And I guess for me, as a member first of a retirement fund, before I'm even a service provider, ultimately I'm a member of a fund. Yeah. I would want to belong to a fund that understands its role in society, that understands that our members are individuals, that are part of families, that are part of societies, that are citizens of a country, and that we've got our own aspirations and our own hopes about what it means in that. So if my fund can be part of a build of a country, I would imagine that ultimately it is the things that get us out of bed every morning. It is about saying what type of country do I want to live in and so forth. And obviously to achieve all of that, there needs to be laws, there needs to be enforcement. The the entire ecosystem needs to work in totality. And when one begins to see serious weaknesses in any aspect of it, be it in governance of a country or governance of the industry or a fund, all of those, I think we need to hold ourselves to high standards across in all of the things that we do. Earlier this week, we had Professor King come in and talk to us about, as members of funds, about whether we think that the role for trustees should be broader. And the view there, without contradiction, everybody was kind of on the same page, that ultimately we need to take a view that says that we need to be transformatory in the things that we do, in the funds that we participate in, and the entire journey must matter. And the S component of that ESG debate is very big on South Africa because of where we are and the challenges that we have as a country. Maybe let me pause there and allow other colleagues to come in, and then we'll only circle back onto this conversation. But I guess for me is that we are members of funds and we are members of a society, and if that which I have as a saving can be put into improving the broader society, that's what I aspire to have. And central to that is this notion of being more inclusive, being more diverse, and creating a more equal society. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Buchi. It's interesting that you mention Dr. King. To some, he's Professor King, but he's well known for, setting out guidelines on corporate governance, and corporate governance should extend to retirement fund trustee boards. Essentially, that's what he inferred in that conversation. So, Kati, what do you think as a trustee? Do you see the duty of making decisions around transformation being part of the other side of the same coin of fiduciary duty?
Yeah, I think, thank you for allowing me on this panel. And I just want to start in the beginning. I think before we want to address anything, the last two speakers raised some salient points about our sad history and where we are. So let's start in terms of our political trajectory, from apartheid to democracy and democracy to transformation in the financial sector. So transformation for me, being involved as a member of a fund, first and foremost, I want to say everything that we do as a trustee on behalf of members, we should be member-centric and act in the best interest of the fund with good governance, mitigating risks and costs. However, when we look at the broader spectrum of transformation, we all here today are learned people, academics, and participants in the industry will agree that no, not satisfactory transformation have occurred, basically to make it inclusive and diverse in terms of society. And some people say it's a universal problem. Others say that we are taking too long in our own political trajectory, economic trajectory, to make a change in the financial industry. So before we even start, we must understand where we're coming from before we want to know where we're going to. And this is an 8.4 trillion industry, including the banks and insurance companies. And if you take investments, it's 4.2 trillion. And obviously, in the economic trajectory, in the new South Africa, democratic South Africa, there is a role for this to play. So I think what is creating a challenge for trustees, firstly, me underpinning why we exist is because we want a decent replacement ratio for members to retire in dignity. However, you can't take away the societal functions. How pension funds and retirement funds used to operate, you got an academic view, it's a risk return, and basically the amount of risk you take for the return you receive. But the new narrative now is risk, return, and impact. And the demographics of pension funds are changing. It's now the majority of the people, more Black workers, are now members of pension funds, and they want to ask you as trustees, they ask us, how is my investment changing my quality of life? Are you investing in the real economy, hospitals, housing, and all of that, deviating from how we used to operate before? So therefore, I think it's incumbent on everybody to understand our broader role in society and in the ecosystem, to say that we've got a role to play. And I might just say that personally being involved as an advocate for governance, I think it's important that with the King and FSTC, the FSCA, the regulator and policymakers, we're trying to make sure that we subscribe to good governance, but also we need this element of transformation. So you can't have an academic view of, or the fiduciary duties of trustees is that they must mitigate risk and costs, and it ends there. They are integrally part of society, and obviously they must have a say in terms of where their monies are invested and how does it impact on their quality of life. I think those are my introductory remarks. Thank you.
I don't know, Wayne, if you are wanting to ask a question or if I should continue. Sorry, your mic is off.
Thank you for all that. So I know we're still waiting for one or two people to make comments, but I was wondering if there's anybody who's joined that we haven't invited to speak. If there's anybody who wants to raise a point at this time, and then maybe we can ask them to share some of their thoughts about what they think this question means. I see Asif Muhammad has his hand up. If you're okay with that, Amanda.
Okay, I still wanted to delve a little bit more deeply into some of the questions, but let's allow Asif to ask the question. Perhaps it's one that I'm also going to ask a bit later on, and then we can continue with the conversation.
So I was thinking, even if it's a contribution rather than just a question, yes, adding on to some of the conversation we've had.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Hi, thanks, Wayne. Thanks for. I thought you're probably hinting at me to make a comment here or whatever, but nevertheless, thanks for that, Wayne. Thanks, Amanda and Butsi. Nice to see you in person, online. Yeah. So Butsi and Kaya, it's kind of a very familiar with this. For the financial. I've just end of April stepped off on behalf of APSIP from the Financial Sector Transformation Council, and we're talking.
Asif is hanging on my side. Are you hearing Asif? Okay.
No, unfortunately not.
All right. Okay. I think we'll take
when he joins again. Yeah.
Take Asif's question a little bit later. I just wanted to just summarize some of the introductory comments from our panelists, and it seems as though that the thinking, the direction, and almost the definition of the scope of transformation seems aligned amongst everyone, from Kaya representing APSIP, but speaking broadly as a South African citizen, with an understanding of the economy, how it functions, and also as an activist. Buchi from a service provider perspective, but also stating quite categorically that she's a member of a retirement fund first and foremost, before becoming a service provider. And I think that's very important to understand that even service providers have to take into consideration the extent of how their their own organizations are functioning with regards to promoting transformation, supporting transformation beyond the compliance requirements. And I really wanted us to have a conversation also with Busi as to what compliance is requiring of the industry or from the industry, and how we can, find almost like a meeting ground where we get the ultimate outcome that we want to achieve on. When Kati was speaking, Kati, one of the things that you mentioned was that trustees are starting to ask the question as to, are you investing in my area, right? Are you making an impact in my area? And for me, it almost seems like a conversation that relates to sustainability. So in the age of terms like sustainability and ESG integration, I think Buchi mentioned ESG in some of her commentary. Some organizations are merging transformation into the social aspects of sustainability. Is that enough? Is that what we are having a conversation about? Are we saying that transformation is part of sustainability? Or because of some of the comments that you made, Kati, as well as what Kaya mentioned regarding our history and the lens that we're supposed to be viewing transformation, should we be intentional about things that relate to transformation and not diluted or seemingly diluted when we speak about sustainability and ESG integration? Kaya, what are your thoughts with regards to that? And I think I want to go back to Kati as well in responding to that. Asif, we'll get back to you just in a moment.
And happy to jump in at the end.
Yes, happy with that. Thanks, Buchi. Kaya?
I was going to say, Buchi can go first.
Okay.
Kaya, why are you throwing me under the bus? Look, I think that in South Africa, we cannot have this conversation without appreciating that it has a racial dynamic to it. And we need to be intentional in appreciating that the inequality we talk about has predominantly Black people that are disadvantaged, and we still perpetuate resourced white minority in many of the spaces that we play in. That is the reality of it. But I guess you cannot be South African and not live in Gauteng and not realize that we have a water problem in Hammanskraal. And that has to be dealt with. And those are the realities of it. And I don't think that one can completely divorce this conversation. We need the entire ecosystem to work, and we need we need all of it to be functioning at all levels. So I guess for me, we can never really run away from the fact that inequality has that racial dynamic, and we need to tackle it. However, I also know that when one talks about transformation in so many ways in our 30 years of trying to make progress, it tends to also, and maybe that I'm keen for Asif later on to come in and share his views on it. There are sometimes things we are stuck. We are stuck in terms of how to progress this further. I think it's Mr. Kunene, they made a comment about even the employment equity aspect of it. How, for example, as Black Africans, we're not coming through in terms of the numbers. We are not seeing the progress that one would expect, given that we are majority of us as South Africans are Black South Africans. So I think that to some extent, we need to reimagine what this progress of transformation means for us, and what are the new levers that we need to perhaps pull, because ultimately what we want is progress for society. So I guess to some extent I'm saying that, can we look at this in a different lens to progress the very essence of equality and progress for predominantly Black people in the country, and Africans seem to be lagging in these discussions that we are having, or the progress that we want to see. So let me leave it there for now. I'm sure it's going to come in, but yeah.
Okay. So you've brought in the racial dynamics. I do want to throw in a little bit of a spanner in the works in response to what you've just spoken about, Buchi. But go ahead, Kaya. You want to weigh in?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, again, it becomes remarkably important for us to perhaps revisit the idea of what responsibility is in relation to trustees and similar fiduciaries, in that the responsibility is to not only ensure the viability of the fund that you see, but to also consider the risks that may actually materialize in relation to that fund. So of course, as I've mentioned earlier on, if you are not the type of person that acknowledges that the fragile nature of South Africa's social fabric is a direct threat to every single thing that we do, then perhaps you shouldn't be given this type of responsibility. So the simple question here is that for as long as we do not deal with the fundamental economic architecture, there's going to be so many people that are left out of the economic loop, so many people that are marginalized, they will become a persistent threat to the viability of the state at large. And as I mentioned, the example of what we saw in July 2021, you could have imagined that some trustees would have said, look, all we do is chase returns. And what we do is that we're going to invest in these particular assets, shopping centers all over the country. Now, suddenly what we saw in July 2021 is this discovery that not only do we have a very broken security apparatus, but even those particular shopping centers, which would have thought, well, it's private property, so therefore it's probably a good investment, they were now suddenly under siege. So now suddenly a week later, you come back as a trustee, you look at your exposure, and then you discover that, well, actually, because we never cared about the things that are happening outside, they have now had a direct impact on the viability and the sustainability of what it is that we oversee. So that for me is where the responsibility transcends the numbers, it transcends the spreadsheets. You have to be able to incorporate the most persistent social and political risks of our time. And of course, that simply means that until South Africa finds a way of onboarding many more of its Black citizens meaningfully into the economy, that risk is simply going to escalate. And it is a risk that will eventually translate into the type of returns that you all oversee.
Katu, how do you respond to that?
Sorry, I don't know if I want to show you all my face, but it's okay if I don't show it. I'm just trying to get the, what you call. Okay, I'm not very good looking, but can you see me? Yeah. Yeah, I think I wanted to take it from there to look at inside the fund and ask yourself, the opening remarks of yourself was saying that we're putting pressure on the trustees and in terms of their fiduciary duties and all of that. I think being involved in the industry for a very long time, I think as custodians of pension funds, we are actually handling monies of members as trustees. We've got that fiduciary duty in terms of risk and mitigation and cost, like Kaya has highlighted and the other speakers. But I think in terms of transformation and what Kaya said, I would like to hone in on that to say going forward, when you look at this industry, how do you make it inclusive for new emerging Black managers who haven't got a track record, no money under management and all of that? And then trustees are frightened to say, do we take that decision? And I want to categorically say that all trustees, yes, must understand the terrain they're in, but they don't have to be experts. They are entitled through the Pension Funds Act, through the rules of the fund, and through all legislation to say, you have got the right to get the best advice that you can get, and you don't have to take the first advice you receive as the one. So you can get a second opinion, you can have a new element of peer reviewing as the second pair of eyes, so that it helps you with rigorous due diligence to say, when you get advice from a consultant, for an example, did you have 4 options? How do you choose it? Did you have rigorous due diligence? And can you give us a record of advice for future reference that you're giving us the best advice? And out of all the options and alternatives available, we did all of that. Then talking about sustainability, can you imagine a South Africa after July 7th in 20 years' time if the economy is not inclusive and you're going to leave the majority of disadvantaged Black people out of the economy, and what is the consequence of them, of that? I think it's sustainability that we're looking at going forward, and we want an inclusive society. So this funds that I was talking about the 8.4 trillion in the financial sector, can be a catalyst for economic development. Beside environment, social and governance, and the planet, people and profit. We're talking about the needs of South Africa, the alternative energy, the health, the transport, all of those things are not for specific people, but makes it possible that there can be job creation, there can be entrepreneurship, and all of these people and all of us can grow together in a sustainable environment. But I think when you look at where we are, I'm representing TAF, the Transformation Action Forum here. We are making a clarion call that basically the transformation endeavors is not materializing the results that we saw in the last 30 years. There is some, it's very, very, very slow, and it needs some momentum. So therefore, we wanted to come up with a collaborative effort to say, let's have a transformation action forum that involves, driven by asset owners. So this is a very important point I'm making, and I want you to allow me some time to just explain. Everybody else in the value chain have got a vested interest, either as an asset manager, an asset consultant, and what have you. When you look at the asset owner, the pension funds themselves, their only vested interest is to make sure that the member gets the best outcome for retiring in dignity, like I said in the beginning. So what we're making the clarion call in our launch, which is going to take place on the 12th of July, is for all the representatives and asset owners, the principal officers, and all of that, to come to the conclusion that transformation is not where it's supposed to be, and now there must be a concerted effort to deal with transformation holistically without undermining the existing bodies, but a convergence and collaboration of everybody to address the question of collaboration from a policy, from a risk, from a cost, from a regulatory and a policy-making point of view across the value chain, and say, how can we have a focused debate? And ultimately, I want to end by saying the trustees in South Africa, we had Skills Development Act. South Africans don't comply to any imperatives of transformation unless it's a law. That's why you have employment equity. That's why you have the Labor Relations Act. I'm an activist, a union activist, and I come from the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. You have to have the parameters to say, legalistically, how do you operate? And sadly, it has to be prescribed. So the only time transformation will take place is when the custodians, the trustees, understand what their role is, the societal role, and transformative initiatives, the role that they could play as part of society. And it must be in their investment policy statement. It must become a policy in the fund to say, over 3 years, we are going to bring in disadvantaged Black managers who never had the opportunity, but through rigorous due diligence and proper advice, we're going to give them a chance to be inclusive and included in the endeavors of economic development. And I want to say that it's very important that the trustees understand that role, that trajectory. I think what Kaya was trying to implore is that that's very fundamental. If they miss it, then they're in the wrong place. Then they're not going to play that role of changing society and enhancing the transformation we're looking for. Thanks.
Thanks, Kati. And I think, thank you. I was actually going to ask you about, the role of the Transformation Action Forum. But you've gone a few steps ahead of me in terms of providing some practicalities. But I just want to close the philosophical discussion and refer back to the comment that Buchi made around, the race aspect of transformation that we cannot, move away from. And perhaps just preface that with what Zibuza has written here in the chat, where he says that my pet peeve with service providers who claim they are transforming is that they employ a minority sector of the population and ignore the Black African population, who form the majority of the population. Secondly, they employ Black foreign nationals. And lastly, when they employ Black African South Africans, they make them assistants or deputies, but seldom place them in key roles. So, taking, both those comments with regards to the race aspect, if I were to put a spanner in the works and say that, what if there's a service provider who considers themselves transformed, not necessarily from the scorecard in its employment equity line, as you mentioned, Kati, just now, but they are having a direct impact on Black Africans in the areas where they reside. So when I talk about direct impact in their empowerment financing strategies, where they are investing and building shopping centers, employing individuals from those communities, what if that has a broader impact vis-a-vis having 10 or let's say more than 50% of the investment professionals being Black? How would you respond to a service provider that states that and says, we're spending billions in communities, so our impact is much greater than just being racially, demographically representative within our organization? Is that sufficient in terms of what transformation is supposed to be and look like? And I'm opening the floor to all our panelists here, or anyone within the audience that is happy to respond to that.
Let's give it another go. Look, ultimately, it is always challenging to regulate human behavior, and I'll explain what I mean by that. A balanced scorecard, by its nature, has components to it. And I would imagine one should begin to see progress in all of those aspects, which is why there's various components to that scorecard. And one can never neglect one, because all of those are important in building a holistic society that we're trying to build, among others, and so forth. But just maybe going back to that issue of ultimately, I guess wouldn't be the financial services sector if we didn't try and complicate everything. But I'm on this path of simplicity at times. So ultimately, the way my observation, and it's not just an observation, what is it, Mr. Kunene? I hope it's not Miss Kunene. Mine. Anyway, what is very clear is that the employment equity as it relates to Black Africans is failing. We just are not seeing the progress that needs to happen, given the size of the numbers that I think. But ultimately, what I've observed is that people tend to employ people that look and feel like them to some extent, or are closest to what they think they understand. And this again has its own complexities. Even in our companies, you talk about Black, white, women. There's also dynamics about urban and rural. We're just not diverse. People tend to employ people that look like them. And those are part of what we need to address as part of a broader issue when we talk about truly diverse people that are open to making sure that everybody begins to develop and lives their best lives. So I think these issues are complex. And when you give people a scorecard, people that have gone to school, that have gone to university, they'll try and make a way to work around it, which is why earlier on I agitated even further. And I said, to my mind, the framework that we have appears to be stale. And somehow we need to shake it up once more and say, 30 years later, how do we need to approach this issue? And what Kaya talked about earlier on, it is so true. We are a very fragile society, and it does not take much to truly get us going in terms of this. So anyway, I guess that's what maybe I wanted to contribute for now. But the 10 people that you talk about, they are important to have them in the organization, because hopefully they'll bring another 10 people that look like them. But it is too slow, the progress that we're seeing through that. And thus we need to perhaps do something different. Thanks.
Thanks, Buchi. And I think that's my key takeaway from what you've just said, is that everything matters, right? Because it all builds the ultimate impact that you're trying to achieve. So it matters that there is representation within the organization, but it also matters the impact that is external to the organization. I don't know if anyone else wanted to comment on that particular aspect before I ask Asif and then Alrich to give their comments or questions. Mandla, I'll come to you as well. Asif?
Hi, Amanda. Thanks very much. Power disenfranchised us there at that point in time when I was speaking. It reminds me of the apartheid days, we disenfranchised with the vote. So I just want to firstly echo what Kaya said, July 2021, and what Kathy alluded to and what now Butsi has also alluded to. We're a fragile society and it can add up. If we don't make it inclusive and include everybody in South Africa's fortunes, we might as well just switch off the lights and go, that type of thing. So I think that's very important. But because this is a retirement, if you might call it, transformations, and it really relates to the Financial Sector Transformation Council and the Financial Sector Code. So in 2017, we got through it. APSIP really pushed hard for a voluntary scorecard for retirement funds. We got that in. It was a big achievement, but not much change. That's the one thing. Then since then, a year later, we negotiated the new framework for the new scorecard for, till now, even there. But SETA, IRFA was brought in, they commented, the trade associations and all of that. We got broad agreement. There was a couple of major disagreements with the trade associations. One specific trade association, not the one that Butsi represents. She represents financial FIA there specifically, but our organization she works for also gets represented via that association there. And I'm just going to give you one simple example, and we need to get the scorecard gazetted. We can't wait, the retirement fund scorecard, we can't wait for disagreements on the other elements, and that needs to be attended to. And this is very urgent and important. So when you're here, you need to, through IRFA, say, look here, where is it? We need to gazette it. We need to take it to Parliament. Butsi, we need your support via the FIA there. Kaya via, APSIP as a representative there. And we need Labour and community. And they're fully behind us. I can tell you that now, without a doubt. Where we're getting, as a simple example, where we get a resistance for is we're trying to level the playing fields between asset managers in South Africa and global asset managers. When global asset managers like BlackRock come here and they take assets to manage offshore, our members will happen now largely to be black. They don't have to comply with BBBE. So they're at a distinct advantage. While we in South Africa, all asset managers, whether it's the large asset managers who are members of this big trade association, they have to comply. So all we're asking is one of the things is APSIP strongly with support with all our other constituencies to say, let's remove the exemption for the foreign asset managers when it comes to BBBE. And other countries do the same thing around the world when it comes to localization, indigenization, or whatever the case might be. That's what they do. But we're getting resistance from one specific trade association. But what I'm saying to all of us, we need to, in our organizations, write to the FSTC, shout from the sidelines, say, yeah, we've agreed the scorecard, there are some differences. Let's meet at the highest level. Let's take it to Parliament and let them decide and gazette the retirement fund scorecard. I can tell you now, we're going to move a lot faster when it comes to transformation if we achieve that. Firstly, Amanda, thanks for allowing me to speak, and I hope we can move forward on this and start screaming more from the sidelines.
As if you raise such a very important point. The voluntary scorecard was part of the, I think it was the amended Financial Sector Code in 2017. I mean, we are in 2023, and you're right. The pace of compliance. Kati mentioned that, South Africans act on things when they are, law when they're legalized, because we want to comply, we need to be compliant, right? And if the law is not supportive of pushing the pace of transformation to be faster, then it basically derails positive outcomes. And the question was posed to ABSIB and the FSTC. What's causing the delay? Kaya, can you give us some insights and respond to Asif in terms of can we
a difficult question.
push this a little bit further? 2017 is a long while to wait for for something that was voluntary to become mandatory, which was the initial intention. And I wanted to ask Lucy if she's available now, to also respond in terms of what was the response rate in that initial call for voluntary retirement scorecard assessment? And what is that response rate telling us about the state of interest or even the readiness to comply with that retirement fund scorecard?
Okay, can we go to Busi first?
Busi, are you online? Can you please respond from an FSTC perspective? I was pretty sure that she was online.
Okay.
Maybe I can help with that answer because I was there. Just to tell you that initially when that scorecard was a year or two later or 3 years later, only about 3 or 4 retirement funds provided a scorecard, and then it wasn't also verified. And now subsequent to that, you would probably say it's a little bit more. More funds are doing their own voluntary scorecard. But I think what we need to do is, what's imperative really is to gazette this current retirement for scorecard, sort out the differences. It's easily, overcome these differences, even if we have to compromise as ABSIB for that matter.
Yeah.
But we have been trying. What unfortunately is happening is a classic case is that business tends to kick the can down the road as far as possible. Always create obstacles in this. Let's research this. Let's do that. Let's do this. That is the classic way they tend to operate, and they do it at NEDLAC all the time. Good example. I mean, you're talking just about race, but I think far more important also at the same time, let's not forget gender parity and equality, because that's crucial.
Absolutely.
I mean, we, for example, in the Companies Amendment Act, we've been, as a firm and ABSIB, we've been pushing for gender pay disclosure parity, and what's been happened at NEDLAC, they kicked it out. Business kicked it out there. It's only pay ratio disclosure, and still that Companies Amendment Act has not come to Parliament to be passed. And we've written again to Parliament to say you need to include the disclosure of gender pay gaps by major geographic segment. Some companies have voluntarily started to do that now, like for example MTN Group. And we gladly applaud them for disclosing that. But you know what? The gender pay gap was about 5 years ago, 27%. It's now 23%. Still, it's still unacceptable. But I need to applaud them for actually starting to disclose that. But they haven't disclosed the pay ratio gaps by major geographic segment. So yeah, I hope I've answered the question, that you're asking, Butsi, on that specifically.
Yeah, and I think, for a lot of these governance practices of disclosure are being borrowed now from the Companies Act, as well as the recommendations from King, from the King guidelines. And we are seeing that listed companies are now expected to provide a lot more detail as part of the listing requirements, and we're hoping that some of those good practices will flow over into other governing bodies, such as retirement fund boards, and obviously then service providers would then also have to comply as a result of being providers to those funds. Kaya, you wanted to respond as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the great challenge is obviously this idea that until consensus is reached, you're not going to move in any direction. And in some cases, you can probably foresee that given the contested nature of the issues at play, you're never going to find consensus between regulators, policymakers, and market participants. And I think in relation to issues of transformation in particular, that's when those conflicts are most evident. And I think in the case of what the FSTC has been mandated to do in particular, that sense of paralysis is probably it was inevitable given the model, the consensus model that we signed up for. And I think the fact that a lot of people don't actually even know what the picture of transformation is today, and probably won't be able to get that information even with the best efforts out there, is reflective of the negative side of this pursuit of consensus, which has simply left us with nothing much to report on.
Thanks, Kaya. And I think that will segue quite nicely into part 3 of our discussion today. But before we get into what transformation looks like and what it should look like, can I give an opportunity for Erich and Mandla to comment or ask a question? Erich, you go first.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Wonderful. Yeah, I would want to see before you could have started just what is transformation, and I mean what you mean under black. A lot of people don't know. When people even here today, I mean you have African, yeah, you have on your panel African, you have white, you have Indian, but not one colored on your panel, and that it seems like transformation normally excludes colors in many cases. When you talk about inclusivity, diversity, it seems like people think they represent colors they don't need to be there. That's the thought. And I mean, you talk about it, but you didn't practice it here today. And Alexander Forbes is on the panel today, and we have asked them. They have all people on their asset management, and but yet they didn't have a color. They even didn't know. I asked them, "Do you have a colored?" They will look around and say, "No, there's nobody." So when we talk about the transformation, it needs to include everybody. That's important, and then we need to go back and do search our own hearts according to this. What is equality? What is diversity? What is inclusivity? It can't be only you. It can't be only me. That's important. That is what the whole thing is all about. To have that. I mean, if I didn't spoke, nobody would have. If I keep quiet, it will be quiet for the rest of our lives. And unless you speak up, nobody will hear you. Inclusivity doesn't include you as individual, me as individual. It must be, and transformation must go further than just who has suffered under apartheid. Everybody did. And that's what it is. We fight our own battles for our own people. I mean, and if we look at people look at the government, if we look at transformation and we look at inclusivity, the fear amongst many of our members is, well, look at the government, they are failing. They were represented in 1994, 80% black, 20% colored Indians and whites. Today, the government is only 5%.
What's that?
There was a reduction of other races. You understand what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying.
People look at parastatals. People look at parastatals and it fall apart.
Oliphant.
Just one second. Just one
Because
second.
you're talking
I
about
think
transformation, but there's not one colored person on this panel.
Okay.
Now, what I mean.
So can I just comment on that, Arif?
Please, let's just fight it, because I talk about those who were called to as experts to speak. I don't talk about members on the whole panel. So this is not a fight. This is an observation, not here, but observation in mostly all the asset managers. Because I'm a trustee and we look at all of them. And it's important to know that FSC actually spoke about that in Cape Town a month ago, that we need to have the demographic representation, and they mention all the race groups. Because we need to hear all the voices, we need to hear all the ideas, need to have all the cultures. there's actually a risk if you don't have everybody on board.
Yeah.
So we did spoke about Alexander Forbes. They will address that with a year. I mean, sorry
Mhm.
that we have to now point out they are here and they talk about transformation, but
Yeah.
okay,
So,
I'll speak later. Thank you.
okay. Thanks, Al. I mean, it's, you make a valid point. This is what you're seeing and you're observing right now. But maybe just to respond to that as well. When we put together this panel, we asked the organizations that are represented here who was available, right? We are mindful and are fully aware that these organizations are representative on their as on of themselves, right? But the individuals that are here today are representatives of their organizations. We did not necessarily pick people based on their race or gender. We just sent out an invitation for those organizations to participate. But within those organizations, they also have the scorecard that Buchi referred to earlier on, and that scorecard clearly has space for all races. So you wanted me to just give a definition of Black, according to the Employment Equity Act, as well as the Black Economic Empowerment Act. Black, the definition for Black is the same, and it includes South Africans who are African colored Indian, as well as Chinese by descent or by birth in South Africa pre 27th of April 1994. So I do know that the organizations that are speaking in this roundtable do subscribe to that definition. It's just unfortunate that the panel is not representative, as you can see, but we all do subscribe to the same definition. Mandla, you wanted to comment or ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and afternoon to the colleagues and persons that have attended. I think the comments of all the speakers that have spoken previously is very important, but what I'm not hearing coming out clearly is the impact or lack of education. If there is education, for example, if we say there is education, is it enough? Because after all these years, there's a little of traction in this regard as being advocated here. And if there is no education, why is that? Because for the intended purpose, we are still going to struggle a bit, as we've been struggling thus far, to have everyone on board. And you cannot have everyone on board when people don't have the necessary understanding, which comes from simplified education, and that education or information is consistent and on a regular basis. We can't have a plan to be inclusive and invite other people on board when we are actually communicating in an interval approach. It has to be consistent. People need to be made to understand, because our level of understanding is not the same. And as I mean, it has been said here that our society and dynamics are not the same. So as a consequence, our understanding of things is not the same. So we have to do this on a persistent basis, if for lack of a better word. So I think it's important that we can have all these nice frills and everything, and approaches and programs and framework and everything, but if people don't understand the desired participation, will actually not happen. So I think we need to concentrate on whether, or answering the questions as to whether, if there is education that is being put out there, is that enough? Perhaps we need to change the approach and the quality thereof. If there is no education, then the question is, when do we intend to do that? Because until that is addressed, we're still going to be having the kind of problems that we're experiencing today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, can I throw the question back at you, Mandla? Who should be providing the education? Let's give it that the status quo at the moment is that, or the current status is that the education is low. I think part of the commentary by IRFA alluded to that people don't understand that transformation is broadly inclusive, and I think that's the reason why it's now called the broad-based economic empowerment. Who should be providing that that education? Is it the consultant, service providers such as the asset manager? Whose responsibility is it to provide that education that you are agitating for?
Madam Chairperson, I mean, my view is that obviously it will be the legislatures that come up with all these legislations or frameworks. And then secondly, it will be the service providers who are then privy and more knowledgeable to this, and also not only knowledgeable, but accessible to this information, whether it's in a draft form or it's in a commentary form. Remember, we as industry, if I were to sort of like pin it down, we as industry, we are exposed to the dealings with the FSA, Treasury, government, and so forth. And the more predominant of our society, they don't have that luxury, unfortunately. So it then becomes incumbent upon us to say, once we've understood what the legislature is trying to say, or the regulator, as it were, then we try to then summarize it and then confine it and package it in such a way that it becomes attractive to the reader, which is the ordinary person out there. So it's the ones that have the information and easy access there too, that it becomes their obligation then to make sure that the rest of society is understands this. And Arnold is correct. I mean, we are a diversified nation, so we need to also take into account that fact to say we are not the same. We live differently, but we all live in the same country, but our lives are different, and the perception and understanding of what we're trying to achieve will be deemed to be understood differently, because it's all circumstantial based on your background and where you're at that time. So we can't, this is not Europe where everyone is the same. Yes, it's different. So we have to take into account all those kind of challenges that we have as a diversified society.
Yeah, and I think Kati also wanted to respond to that, to the question about who
yeah, I think
the
I don't want to blow our trumpet about the fund. I'm coming from the Telkom Retirement Fund. But one thing I want to say that we've got specific subcommittees for participating trustees, from Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee to Benefits Committee, but more especially I want to focus on communication and training. We've got a DMS, a digital media service in Telkom, where we can call in specialists to say if the market is going down and people are concerned, we can have these focus groups in different areas because we are an ICT company. But what I wanted to say as a requirement, firstly and foremost, the onus should be on the fund itself, because when you allude to training by a service provider, there's no guarantee that it's going to be accredited firstly, because they're going to talk about their products and their relationship with the fund. But we want accredited, independent training by accredited service providers, like universities do it and all of that. So as a precursor to trustees being inducted in our fund, we are very proactive in communication. I think it's not recognized in the industry, but I think we do more than that's demanded of us. We keep them abreast of, ahead of the curve, whether the market is not performing or there's a co-critical sentimental concern or there's an offshore agitation of geopolitics and there's fear about people wanting to leave. So we always keep abreast of that. But with training, I think the FSCA has got an online training toolkit. And in our fund, one of the things is that within 6 months of your appointment, you need to make sure that you independently attempt that online training toolkit, and you must pass it. And we give you 6 months to do it. We meet every quarterly, so by the end of the second quarter, you should have been what you call attended that training, and you must come and provide your certificate to the principal officer's office, and then it will be verified that you can come along. Coupled to that is training as a budget, as a fund, because you have to take it out from the contributions, unfortunately. So if you can't ask other people to train you, they will train you according to how they want you to perceive things and all of that. So to make it independent, you must have a budget. And what we do at our fund is one day before the board meeting, full board meeting, we have a training session that is predetermined by what are the challenges confronting the trustees beyond induction, beyond the rules and all of that, and what the trustees should be ahead of the curve. So I think all funds should subscribe to that, have a budget, and dedicate it to independent accredited training. I just wanted to add that that is the best practice that where I'm coming from. Thanks.
Okay, I think we've now moved into merging the part 2 and part 3 of our conversation today, where part 2 is about what are the intentions of transformation, and part 3 is what it needs to look like. And I think, as Mandla said, people are tired of pretty policies that say what needs to be done. But can we start seeing the tangible effects of transformation? And even if we currently don't have the big picture in terms of what the status is in our industry, based on the reports that we get from the Financial Sector Transformation Council, the FSTC, what are our different stakeholders seeking to bring to the table in terms of advancing transformation? I know Kaya APSIP has been quite involved with conversations around transformation. What is the intention with those conversations, and is there a mandate that you are giving the people that you are having those conversations with, or an ultimatum of some sort? But what are you trying to what are you wanting the industry to take away from these conversations, and other actions with regards to transformation that APSIP is involved in?
Yeah, so I think the realization, the main issue in the South African context is that in order to address what are obviously historical anomalies, you either are going to let the market do it on its own terms and its own pace, which is never going to get us there, or you're going to be very clear about what the parameters for change need to be and how we're plotting on getting there. So I think the idea behind crafting these guiding parameters are the ones that say, look, this is the ultimate goal that we are collectively trying to pursue. So therefore, this is where you can play your role in getting us there. So I think the role of advocacy organizations is to occasionally look into the status of the nation at large, look at what industry bodies and other industry players are doing, and then say, well, actually, it looks like we're never going to get to that particular endpoint if we don't do things differently, or we don't accelerate the nature of the things that we're doing. So that becomes really the big idea. And of course, the reality in that is that whichever sector you look at in South Africa, it has become very clear that market participants or the markets left to its own devices is probably never going to meet anything that resembles transformation in the South African context. So in the absence of these guiding parameters, whether it's the sector charters or transformation councils, we probably would be much worse off today than we are if we hadn't put those structures in place. They are by no means perfect. I'm remarkably critical of essentially every single one of them, but they are an evolving and they are a work in progress. And it's just a question of how do we make sure that they work better? Because I think in the long run, we'll all be evaluated on the simple question of what we did or what we didn't do in order to aid the country's pathway towards substantive transformation.
It was quite interesting to see the Financial Sector Conduct Authority put out a transformation a strategy or standpoint. And, you know, when the FSC, when the regulator puts something out, you're like, this is going to become a regulation, right? And we also saw in the Insurance Act a requirement for insurers to have a transformation strategy in order for licensing to be approved and granted. At the moment, it does not categorically state what level or what type of transformation needs to be in place. It just says a transformation strategy, which I believe is a precursor for it to be mandatory, similar to what you have in, you know, when you like for the gambling boards, etc. Right? So, what is the feeling from trustees? In terms of, yes, maybe right now there might not be a lot of activity with regards to legislation being in place, such as from the FSTC. But if it goes into the Pensions Act, that transformation needs to be in place to the extent that it affects licensing and compliance requirements. You know, what other actions are trustees going to, you know, put forward, Kati, from the asset owners, TAF? What advocacy is TAF putting in place for transformation to become more mandatory rather than voluntary? Because I think part of the reason why we've had little progress, and I agree with you completely, Kaya, if we didn't have these guidelines in place, we won't be speaking much about any form of progress. And I think also that's part of the reason why we've got the amended or the amendment bill for employment equity being enacted, being more enforced rather than just leaving every organization to its own devices. So what is TAF doing? APSIP has indicated what they're doing from an advocacy perspective. What progress have you made, Kati, in your advocacy endeavors?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you know, we had a launch, and as I indicated that we're making the clarion call for AGM, and the intention is to have a focused attempt in terms of the FSTC, in particular, the scorecards and all of that. I think speaking as an asset owner, I think there's no proactiveness with regards to a collaborative effort to say what are the deficits from a transformative perspective. So I can categorically say, you know, sometimes we get the feeling, and I agree with Kaya, if the little that was not done, where we would be, you know, we would really be in the depths of unachievement. But I think it provided a guide. But the feeling is that there's a tendency to talk about us and not to us. There's no forum that I saw of the asset owners where they congregate and collaboratively say, hey, these are the deficiencies that we recognize and all of that. Let me tell you something how I feel. In terms of the scorecard, everybody is level 1. When you talk about, you know, a deeper insight into the company, down the value chain, who's your broker, who's your auditor, is that permeating right to the bottom? There's no indication as to what is the current status and what is the gap and where we intend to be. And I think as TAF, one of the things we want to initiate is an independent R&D, research and development, to say, what is the current status in terms of transformation in the industry? It's not to say that you are BE, you are level this, you are in this industry, and you're doing these assets. It's more than that. It's actually transformation across the value chain and affecting everybody. And I also asked myself the question, when you look at transformation from the regulator, the policymaker, is there a capacity to enforce it? Because I sincerely believe that what can't be measured, there's a saying in management, it must be able to be, whatever you do, actions must be measurable. And if it's not enforced and you don't have the capacity to monitor that, I mean, there's a view that we've got too many funds and there should be a consolidation and all of that. The second thing is on a transformative effort.
So, Katsi,
from TAF, we want to get involved in these subcommittees. Sorry.
Just a question on your first comment about the collaboration as well as the independent review that you want to embark on.
Yes.
What do you think? So which parties, what would make it independent? Is the FSTC not an independent, body? It represents the whole sector, the whole financial sector. Is that not sufficient to consolidate or aggregate the information that comes from the FSTC from each of the financial services entities?
Yeah, I think
what would make your review more independent?
Yeah, I think when we appoint somebody to audit it independently, I mean, they can talk to the regulator, they can talk to the policymaker, they can talk to the asset managers, they can talk, asset managers got a lot of bad experiences where there's gatekeeping and all of that. And they can't exercise their right to speak publicly, because if they do so, they'll be victimized. I mean, they just accept what they get at that fee. And when they want more, they are actually prescribed to say you can't get that because you haven't got the capacity. So I think that's what we want to do. And further than that, we want to push the envelope to say, in terms of Regulation 28, as TAF, we've got a major problem to say we're having a challenge in terms of foreign direct investment in South Africa. We allow these people to take 45% of the money. Can you imagine? Almost 50% is going to go offshore, create jobs there. Then we're talking about infrastructure development deficits in South Africa and encouraging funds to invest in the real economy, and that is counterproductive. So I think there must be a reimagination, a reinventing, a rethinking of some of these things. And I think what obtains on the ground currently needs to be revisited. And TAF, wants to synergize with everybody, not replace them, but to say, let's have a convergence of the meeting of the minds. And we did talk to the IRFA, we talked to Basita. I mean, you also had meetings with ourselves. And what we're saying is that we want a collaborative effort to deal with transformation and from a focus point of view, and say, how do we execute and have implementation more than speaking about things. And otherwise, I want to end by saying, today is Africa Day, where we, celebrating 60 years of the African Union. Yes. And I think it's important for us to understand what Madiba told us. It's in our hands, and it dare not fail, on our watch. So if we don't implement transformation, we're going to, be victims of a circumstance that we were responsible for. So I think TAF was important, because when we looked at what is happening, we want to respectfully say that everybody has the good intention of doing something for transformation, but there wasn't a focused effort. And we respectfully saying, let us create a body where we can all converge and have a discussion, collaborate with each other, provide a charter, give guidance to the asset owners as to what we want to achieve through targets, measurable targets, and make a start to say in 5 years' time, at least 50% of your your offerings, your investments should be in Black managed and Black hands. We did it in our fund through our IPS, and it is possible. I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay. So I think in the last 30 minutes, I would like us to get a little bit more practical in terms of what we want transformation to look like and what we want to achieve. And if we zone in more specifically in the retirement fund industry and look at firstly the guidelines. So the retirement fund scorecard focuses on representation on the board of trustees. It looks at the service providers. So in terms of preferential procurement, it looks at the service providers to the retirement fund across the full value chain of the service providers that a retirement fund would require. And then it also looks at some trustee education and skills development, as well as if it's a standalone fund, making sure that there's representation across each of the different race demographics within that retirement fund, if it's a standalone. So that's just what the guidelines say. From a service provider perspective, Buchi, if I can bring you back here, back in here, is what exactly were you trying to achieve when you made that bold stance around transformation? And practically, what do you think we can achieve for transformation in the retirement fund sector in particular?
Yeah, thanks. Just thinking back to a year ago, sometimes one felt like you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because even when we launched what we believed to be the ticket to the game, the amount of backlash that one got was quite surprising, in the sense, and I guess maybe talk to some of what I was talking about earlier on, that sometimes this conversation of ours is so jaded and toxic, in the sense that we tend to want to debate even the things that make the most obvious of sense. So in essence, there we define the profile of a manager that we believe should look like if we were to advance transformation and equality. And in itself, it is nothing earth-shattering, if one is to be honest. It literally talks about the level of basic level of diversity that one would expect in any company that hopes to operate in our country. And in essence, we said, you know what, we're also not going to be illogical or irrational, whatever word you want to use. We'll give you a bit of time to get to that. However, at a point in time, we are telling you now that for you to be able to get a certain allocation from us, similar, this is a kind of levers that any fund could pull once a fund is decided in terms of what its own strategy is. So we define that, we put it out to that, and we are in engagement with managers that perhaps do not meet that criteria. But for me, what was critical as well in this discussion and conversation was how some people would choose to somehow confuse transformation with performance and outcomes. And the two are not mutually exclusive. We truly believe that through diverse teams, one will deliver better outcomes. So my colleague Endle Pile herself realized that she could not throw stones if she lives in a glass house. So she herself needed to ensure that her own team is truly transformed. Her investment professionals are very transformed, so that we could not ask of others that which we are not expecting. So I guess for me it starts with that. Each fund itself, that which we ask of others, it must reflect what we have. And I think Katu put it elegantly in terms of some of the work that have been done. So I guess our view was to say that if we were to truly transform, to make sure that, for me, also maybe I'm also running towards your closure of this conversation. I think a fund for me will truly have transformed if the owners of the assets, which are the members and the beneficiaries of this fund, reflect the demographics of our country. Otherwise, we are throwing, we're using a cup to put out a house on fire. So we can transform the board of trustees and all of that. But ultimately, I think what we're working towards is to say the owners of the assets, the people whose life we're trying to make the biggest difference, positive difference for, Are they truly is that the transformation that we want? Because sometimes I feel we are having discussions between us as professionals in this industry about things that are interesting for us. But ultimately, if we're to truly transform our country and transform all of that, the members of funds and the assets that sit within fund, when one looks through that, who do they belong to? And how should they be used if we're to truly make a difference for that which matters for them? Bit philosophical, but ultimately what I'm saying is that even the very basic things, even with our flawed scorecards that we have, that is at least something we can start to implement. Set a strategy, give yourself a target in terms of what are the type of service providers you're looking for. And there's a lot of guidance that we have as an industry, but a fund needs to be able to commit to that and see it through.
Can I ask you a follow-on question, Buchi? You mentioned that because you're a multi-manager and the underlying asset managers, you've basically said to them you need to show some diversity. How are you going to measure transformation? Is it the scorecard? I mean, Kati already said put that aside, right? Because everyone is a level 1. What else are you going to be looking at as a measure of transformation?
Yeah. So you'd be surprised in terms of you assume there are people that are level 1, but you'd be surprised as to the number of people that still have not achieved that, which is a ticket to the playground. So there is that, but even within the balanced scorecard, there are elements that we felt were important and you need to emphasize. So that one of employment equity.
Just one question before you go into the detail. At the scorecard level, what are you asking for at a minimum?
So we are asking for a minimum, a level. Geez, let me not give a number here because I probably will get it wrong. Sorry, I'll need to check in terms of that. But there is a minimum level.
Can you say you're asking for a minimum of a level 3?
Is it minimum of a level?
The last time I looked, and perhaps a little bit of education for some that are on the call who may think that a level 3, and you rightly say, Buchi, a lot of organizations have not achieved the level 1. It's actually a handful. It's not that many, but a level 4 is considered the bare minimum, right? So you're asking for above the bare minimum. And the reason why it's called the bare minimum at level 4 is because according to the procurement levels, the recognition at a level 4 is 100%. So for every R1 that is spent, you can only claim R1, right? But then when you get to a level 3, you can now claim R1.10. So it's 110%. So it means that you get almost like a multiplier for purposes of procurement, which makes up the largest part of the scorecard, from the generic scorecard as well as the retirement fund scorecard. So I just thought I should just
you're the techie in that. I'll stick to the principles of it. So the principles that we've applied literally is one that says there must be a bare minimum level of compliance, which is expected. It really is not. It ought to be achievable for any player in this country. That's that. But then we looked into the scorecard itself and said, which aspects of this do we want to emphasize and look and drill deeper into? There could be other things that are people that companies are doing. The level 1s that you talk about is because you get them we get procure, we get other things right. But the hardest one for our industry, among others, has been the issue of employment equity. And even in the conversation that has come up, Alrich mentioned it, Mr. Kunene mentioned it. It's all about employment equity. What type of diversity do we expect to see in your investment team, where the rubber hits the road, where decisions are being made in terms of assets? So we wanted to see diversity within that. So those for me are the ones that stand out. And obviously there's detail to that, which I don't have in front of me now in terms of that. But those were some of the critical elements of that. And what I'm saying is that, I guess for me, as a fund, those are things you can begin to emphasize. What is important to you, given the members that you represent, and that, what aspect of a scorecard do you wish to emphasize if that's the route you want to follow? But yeah, so there's basic information, but yeah.
And I think that's a great starting point from a practical perspective,
Mm.
is understanding the demographic profile, so the employment equity profile of the decision makers on the investments. Because if you have the diverse voice, you will have representation in terms of, product development, direction where assets are invested as well, because there will be an understanding from, that will be multifaceted in terms of the kind of impact that is likely going to be required from a fund. And I think that that's a key takeaway for retirement funds to consider as well.
And all of that sits on top of performance, which we're saying it is not mutually exclusive. It's a given. And the
Absolutely.
rest kind of sits on top of that. Thanks, Amanda.
Absolutely. So in this conversation,
Amanda, if I may, sorry, Amanda, if I may just jump in there. And I mean, I think the one element I want to add here is that, we're talking about all the structural things and the structural advocacy, activities that we can partake in, but there's also an opportunity, and I think for me to look inwards and say, like, we've got the big structural issue, but as a fund, what does this mean for us outside just the compliance? So I mean, what we're talking about, the structural things, nearly becomes a compliance issue, which people hopefully take more than compliance. But how do you make that real and deal with the emotions, especially something like Elrich's comment, about representation? Because, that if you just look at it at a scorecard level, you could probably deal with it without addressing that. But as a fund, what does this mean for us as a fund? How do we conduct ourselves and how do we make a decision? And I think that even starts at some behavior within the fund and how meetings are held. And do we give enough opportunity to everyone to be heard so that we can have the deeper and richer transformation discussions? And maybe I just wanted to bring in that, maybe the smaller fund focused activities, which I mean, obviously the other things are very important, but that's a big element for me as well. And that's kind of what she was talking about when Alexander Forbes made that decision. A consciousness that goes beyond a legal imperative. It's this is how we address it, and maybe some of the outcomes that people were talking about, that Kati mentioned earlier on for us. The three levels, risk, return, and impact. I mean, those are things that boards can have a look at. I just thought I'd share some of those thoughts, because that for me is another thing. We can't wait for the scorecard to happen. If we believe in transformation, we need to make that real already, and hopefully it aligns with what is required in terms of compliance. But we have the agency already as a board to make some of these decisions.
And I think from what Buchi just mentioned, as well as yourself, Wayne, it links back to what Elrich and Mandla was speaking about. With regards to representation, what does representation actually mean? What does it look like? And I think it goes back to what Mandla was asking, is whether trustees fully understand what transformation is about. And if you go into the granular detail, so it's good and well to have the scorecard and you've got the level that you are presented with. But when you're looking at employment equity, what is it actually about, right? It's a scorecard on its own that speaks to race representation, gender representation, persons of disability representation at the different occupational levels, right? So it's not just broad-based representation, is at the important areas in the organization. Do you have full representation? And I think it is very important for trustees, when they're considering embedding transformation as part of the golden thread in their decision-making process, as you've mentioned now, Wayne, is that do they fully understand that when a service provider comes and says they are a level 1, Kati, and it looks like you might be well educated and well knowledgeable about this, is that what does that level 1 actually look like, right? So asking the pertinent questions about the detail. what does your demographic profile in that organization look like? And as trustees, when you're making a decision as to onboard that particular service provider, how important is that makeup to you in your decisions? And then make those decisions from a point of knowledge and understanding of what that singular number actually means. Can you provide us with some practical examples as well? Kaya, apologies. I almost mixed your name up with Kati's for a moment there. Of what trustees can start embedding in their discussions at the board level, so that transformation becomes more practical and more real for them. Have we lost Kaya?
I don't know. I'm having a look here for us quickly.
Okay. While you're
I
having
think
a
we
look,
have Amanda. Yeah. No, we have. I see he's not here. Yeah.
oh, and I wanted to get his parting words.
Yes. Comments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We will be going to parting comments. Just the key takeaways that we want our panelists to give to our attendees today. But let me just give our audience time to ask questions or make any comments before I move back to the panelists. No questions, no comments.
Chair, there's a comment.
Please
thank you.
go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that it's important that we have to realize that we're going to need each other, all race groups. If we go back to the Steinhoff issue, we saw it was they crumbled because they were not representative in their boards. They had a brotherhood together, and they did not keep each other accountable or responsible. That's why Steinhoff fall, because they only have one race, one voice, and one idea in one room. And that's the reason why they crumble. If someone is corrupt in that room, you would have overlooked it and said, "That's my brother, let's let it go. It's our time to eat." That's the time phrase that people use. But if you have different races in one room, in a board room, we keep out for each other, we keep each other accountable. So something will fall when all voices are not heard in rooms, in boardrooms, in organizations. And you can't legislate racism in somebody's heart. Racism will be racism in your heart forever if you don't deal with it personally. You can't bring out a law against the person's heart. It's something that you grow up. And you need to deal with it personally with racism. If you don't like a different race group, you have a big problem and no law can help you with it. It's a personal issue that you need to deal with. If there wasn't laws, we would have been still back in the 80s. So laws need to be introduced to spearhead and facilitate the process of transformation. But some issues, as you said, the B scorecard normally is level 1, most of the asset managers or the service providers. But you need to have a look through. That's why we always have a look through to all be level 1 and see if it's possible that they need to have all races. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you have 2 people in organizations, so that will be difficult. But big companies need to have all people on board. Otherwise, they lie if they say they are diverse, inclusive, if everybody's not there. So they shouldn't lie if they say, normally people do that presentation when asset managers come to our boards and we ask them to help us with offshore investment. There's a first thing they talk about is the BE1 scorecard, and they say, well, let's look through it. So I will encourage everybody to have a look through all BE scorecard that is level 1. But it was a very good conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ulrich. We've just got a few minutes left. Is there anyone else in the amongst the attendees that wanted to weigh in on some of the conversation, some of the comments that have been made today? And I think, you know, Ulrich, to just weigh in on the point that you've just made as well, is that I think the difficult conversations must be had at those boards, right? If it's that important, then it must be on the agenda. We cannot expect things to materialize or form or move in a particular direction if we're not having the conversation, if we're not holding people accountable. So I think one of the practical aspects of this conversation that I would like to suggest for the boards of trustees is to put transformation as part of the agenda of the discussion. Because if it forms part of the seamless sustainability of running the fund, then it should be on the agenda. It should be intentionally put on the agenda, and the conversations need to be had. And I can tell from some of the comments that we are receiving in the chat that this conversation is not done. We don't, you know, converse enough on this, but more than that, what ideas and practical tools can we put in place to actualize transformation, because we cannot wait for others to make it happen for us. Okay, I don't see any more hands that are up, so I'm going to ask our panelists to give us their key takeaways or key comments that they want attendees to walk away with from today's discussion. And like I said, this is just part 1, and there are multiple conversations that we still need to have so that we can co-create and drive the impact that we want to see in this sector. I see, Buchi, you've got your camera on. Perhaps you want to take the first part of giving your parting shots.
Yeah, parting shots, and thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. It is one that we cannot afford to get jaded about, one that we cannot afford to not put on the front burner of everything that the things that we do. So I guess we are seeing the first generation of workers to emerge from this current environment of defined contributions and so forth. And we're already seeing, or our observations is that there's lots of inadequacies of that system. And it again perpetuates some of the inequalities that we see, that after 40 years of working, workers emerge out of this, and they again put back into whichever undeveloped parts of the country they came from. That tells us that something is wrong with our industry. And at the heart of it, if we begin to solve for transformation, perhaps we will have a bigger progress in terms of that. So I guess for me as a parting words for us as trustees and members of funds, if we have had the privilege of having a job in a country of such high unemployment, I guess we have a responsibility to ensure that we use the little savings that we have to transform the broader society. Then that's how we should see transformation. It is not about how many black, white, colored, you know, all of it. It is, of course, we need that. It is a scorecard. We need to have it because if it's not measured, it apparently doesn't get done. But we need to see it as, we must never lose that big picture about what we're trying to achieve. And yeah, that's it for me. And thank you so much for the discussions. Loved it.
Thank you very much.
And let's keep it going.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for those words. Kaya, I see you've rejoined us.
Eskom came knocking there for a moment, but I defeated them through other means. So I think obviously the big takeaway is that we have to acknowledge that at some point in time, we need to stop having these speculative conversations and move on to definitive action plans and start talking about the action plans that have been put in place and why they are or are not working. I do think that at some point in time, we are running the risk of people legitimately asking the questions of how we spent the past 30 years trying to figure out what to do, instead of them saying, well, this is the national roadmap towards transformation, this is the sectoral roadmap towards transformation, and this is how we're going to evaluate it. And at some point in time, ask difficult questions about what is working and what hasn't worked. I do sometimes fear that we get paralyzed by the sins of the past, and that everybody says, well, but actually 10 or 15 years ago, we had consensus, we agreed, and then somebody didn't do their job, so therefore we're not willing to engage again. It's quite simply unfortunate that that's turned out to be. We do need to be a bit more decisive and less speculative.
Fully agree. Kati?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank you for inviting us on this esteemed panel and diversified views. I wanted to say, in terms of transformation, I've been involved in my fund being responsible for transformation, and I want to say it's not for the faint-hearted. There's a lot of pushback, there's a lot of resistance. You need a paradigm shift in the thinking of the trustees. And one of the things we started when we started in 2011 is that we had a strategic session to discuss the vision of the fund and what we want to achieve for every 3 years that the trustees are entrusted with the responsibility of investing members' money. And I think we need to always ask ourselves and hone in on whose money is it anyway. It is members' money, and it should be, everything we do should be member-centric. It should impact on the members and how it affects their quality of life. We can't keep on talking about our past. It's in our hands. We have passed 30 years, and we still we all of the view that there's no adequate effort and shoulder to the wheel to say, let us deal with this transformation. And I think one of the things I want to comment about, we are very unique in South Africa when they talk about our constitution. But one of the things, I was in an international conference and somebody from Ireland asked me about how we have dialogue in South Africa and the miracle we achieved in '94. And they're so appreciative of the fact that we have a NEDLAC. And, I was explaining to them that it's an agency of dialogue for participants, and what takes place there, then it goes to the white paper, green paper process in Parliament and all of that. And I almost feel, as an advocate for transformation and good governance, we're almost apologetic for a transformation. And we don't see the imperative for it. We're always apologizing. And I think another mistake we make in South Africa, we are too consultative and we want to reach consensus. So people have the opportunity to hide behind resistance motives of saying, no, we need to investigate this, we need to do this and that. And I think when the train is moving, I just wanted to say, from a transformative perspective, we'll have to leave some people at the station because they don't want to change and they won't change. And I fully agree that all boards should be, I just want to make 2 comments. All boards should be representative of the demographics because that is members' money. And secondly, I wanted to say that when we're looking at Regulation 28, I don't think it's anybody's view that people in the rest of the world for global investments, when we talked about giving people opportunity from a transformative exercises in the fund where I come from, everybody was doing equity long only, and you had 60 managers all going for the same asset. And what we said, we needed diversification, we needed other asset classes, private equity, bonds, fixed income, property, Africa, and global. And I think that when we're going to invest 45% You are giving your monies, with due respect, I'm mentioning a name because they got billions of rands and trillions of rands, is BlackRock. That money from South Africa is creating jobs in their country. And if we want to say from a transformative perspective, I just want to round up to say we need to invest our money in our economy and create a catalyst for economic development. And because our government needs the help, to deal with the deficiencies of the past. Thank you.
And just my closing comments. I think this has been a very important conversation to have, and as Kaya said, the next steps is the implementation, right? These are crucial conversations that must be had at the board level. We don't have to wait for legislation to direct us to move forward. As boards of trustees, we have an understanding what is required, what is of the best interest for the members on our funds, and we should be acting. Actually, our fiduciary duty is to act in the best interest of our members, and transformation forms part of that conversation. So let's have it on the agenda for our boards of trustees, and also let's have it on the agenda for a follow-up conversation, which may be had either in a follow-up webinar or, as some have suggested, as part of the conversations that we will be having on making it happen at our conference. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for the insightful and expert and collaborative insights and conversation that we've had today. And I'd also like to thank our attendees for staying until the very end. It has been a worthwhile conversation to have, and I look forward to having this conversation further with yourselves. And, prepare those hard questions. They are crucial and they're very important. So let's keep having those discussions. We cannot be comfortable and let things stay the way they are. We have to look back and be answerable and accountable for driving our sector forward into the transformed status that we would like to see. Thank you. And on that note, it is 2:00 on the dot. Thank you, and see you at our next webinar, and hopefully see most of you at our conference in September. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Wayne.
Thanks.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Cheers, everyone. Cheers. Cheers. Cheers, Mandla.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.